rent an old house which I converted to a preschool. I was never able to keep a night janitorial crew. All would quit saying the place creeped them out or make other excuses. One day a few years ago, I opened the school to find all the mop buckets and cleaning supplies thrown everywhere. I called the cleaning crew and they informed me that they were never going back. Okay, this was the fourth crew, so I asked what happened. He said, "You won't believe it, but we saw a ghost and ran out of there." By this time, I had the place for a few months, lost 4 night janitors, and knew something was definitely up. Over the years, there had been numerous unexplainable things. One time, ADT was installing cameras in the classrooms, and the tech came to the office all freaked out. FYI, he was doing the installation projects after hours, and the office is in another building, which is the house next door. And he said, "You have to see this." All out of breath. He proceeds to run video back to show the 4 cameras in the house. He was working in the room with camera number 4, so as he was working, he is standing on a ladder, and in the video, you see camera 1 go to static, then normal. Then the static moves to camera 2, then normal, then 3, then finally the camera 4 where he is working. Then as it goes normal, every single poster or item on the wall falls off at the same time. This started to convince me that there was definitely an energy or something in the house. Over the years, we have used the cameras to watch back weird things. Not like furniture moving or anything, but definitely things that don't add up. Like doors being open even when they were closed the night before. Alarms going off so many times that the police and fire department show up. Finally, we don't even set them anymore. The toilet paper and hand towels in the bathroom are all unspooled. Just weird stuff, like papers falling off of counters, like there was a strong wind, or a box of toys falling over to its side. Little things. We ended up using our teachers to clean up their own classrooms and bathroom before closing and having to adjust. But it's now the running joke in the preschool that our ghost likes to play just like the kids. And when the kids are gone, it gets mad and messes things up. This is a true story. I don't want to say where the preschool is because it could affect my business, but I definitely wanted to share. It turned the skeptic into a believer. I was stationed at Fort Irwin National Training Center in 1998 when I encountered a black-eyed kid. I lived in the barracks with the other unmarried guys from my company. My roommate had driven to Baker that night to spend some time with his girl. My next-door neighbor, Coco, was blasting his music, so I knocked on his door to see if he wanted to hang out. No answer. Probably couldn't hear me over his music. I walked out of the barracks to see if anyone else was around. The place was deserted. A strong wind picked up suddenly. I heard what sounded like 100 people laughing, being carried on the gust. This weirded me out a bit, but I reasoned it must have been a group of soldiers walking around enjoying the night. I proceeded to walk up the stairwell to the second floor. As I turned the corner, I saw a boy, 8 or 9 years old, sitting on the top of the stairs. Strange, considering these barracks were for single men and it was 11 at night. I took another step when I noticed his eyes were completely black. He stared at me, and I felt true terror as if my soul was in jeopardy. I ran back down the stairs into my room, where I locked my door and hid for the rest of the night. I thought I had encountered the devil or a demon. It wasn't until last year that I learned of the black-eyed kids. As I read through other people's stories, I realized what I had encountered, and I know for a fact that is what I saw. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I grew up in the deep south of the United States, Georgia to be exact. I love it here and don't think I will ever leave. I've experienced a lot of weird things, mostly because of the nature and history of where I live, and partly because of my weird family. So here's a little background. After an ugly divorce when I was 9 months old, my parents split, and my mom moved back home with her parents with me in tow. My grandparents live in an old plantation house on 10 acres in the middle of nowhere that has been in our family since the late 1800s. My grandmother grew up there, her father before her, and so on. The house is enormous and there are large implications about its history, but I will point out that it was taken over by my family in the late 1800s, post-Civil War. I didn't know much about the history of the house before my family took it over while I was growing up, but I did hear family stories about my great-grandfather bootlegging with the grandfather of our town's now sheriff and profiting greatly from it. There were also rumors of my great-grandfather shooting partners of his moonshining endeavors on the property, and my great-great-grandfather beating a man to death for sleeping with his first wife in their bed. But that's about it. None of those things happened in the house. So, I grew up in that house. Even when my mom got remarried, I opted to live with my grandparents. It was easier for everyone. No bitterness, just easy. My mom is wonderful and was still an enormous part of my life, as she and my stepfather bought the adjacent property to my grandparents. So this story happened when I was 20. I was staying home while my grandparents, mother and her husband, uncle and sister drove to Maryland for a week for my cousin's graduation from college. I was going to a university in the next town over, and it was finals week, so I couldn't go. I had my ex-fiancé stay with me, since the house was so big, and I only had one final that I actually needed to go to campus for, so I'd be pretty lonely. He was also going to help me with the dogs. My grandfather is an honest-to-God farm boy who believes blue tick hounds are the only breed worth its salt, so of course we had two, Reba, named after Reba McEntire, and Roscoe, named for Roscoe P. Coltrane of the Dukes of Hazzard. These dogs are purebred and all muscle. I also have a 150-pound razor's edge blue pit named Butch. The dogs, paired with the arsenal of guns my grandfather has, left no need for a security system. My friends even now swear they get a creepy vibe from the house. I never had any before this, but the house has a reputation for being creepy. Rumors about lynchings, satanic rituals, clan meetings, all before my family bought way back in Civil War times. I never paid much attention because I knew it all to be bullcrap. Southern towns love to gossip, and that's what I thought it was. A couple of days after my grandparents left, my boyfriend and I were outside in the backyard about to smoke, and while he was twisting up, I happened to look up at the house, and the light in my grandparents' room was on. I hadn't turned it on, or even been in there, and my ex was very respectful, so I knew it wasn't him. To avoid being paranoid, I called the dogs behind me and went inside to check everything out. I got upstairs and looked around my grandparents' room. The hounds wouldn't go in, which I didn't think was odd at the time, which maybe I should have, because they slept in there. Butch stayed glued to me with his hackles raised. I didn't find anything, flipped off the light, and went back out to smoke. The rest of the night went normally, and my ex and I went to bed. I made sure all the lights were off before I went. The hounds wanted to sleep in my room at the foot of my bed, which I thought was because we were the only ones in the house, and Butch stayed right up on me in the bed, which I thought was because the hounds were in the room. Butch is very possessive of me. Around 1-ish in the morning, I woke up. It was one of those out of a dead sleep, cold sweat kind of deals. I had never experienced it before. I sat up and looked at the door across the room. It was open. I knew I had closed it before I went to bed. The dogs were also standing at the foot of the bed, staring out of it. I assumed that Roscoe had gotten down, and that was what woke me up. My ex had gone to the bathroom and left the door open. I shook him awake to ask. He said he'd been asleep the whole time and rolled back over. I noticed while lying back down that there was a light on down the hall. I also noticed that the dogs were still staring at the door. I was so sure that there was someone in the house. I got up and grabbed the 12-gauge that my grandpa made me keep in my room from under the bed and called the dogs to follow me out of the room. It was my grandparents' room again. I searched the whole house, all 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, attic, downstairs, all of it. Nothing. I grabbed my cigarettes and phone and went on the back porch to let the dogs out. I smoked a cigarette and went back to bed. I called my grandpa the next day, thinking there may just be an electrical short in the wiring or something. I told my grandpa what happened, and he told me there was no short and wanted me to talk to my uncle. When my uncle came on the phone, he told me a story that happened when he was growing up. Apparently, he had come home one night in high school and the house was empty. He went up the stairs to his room, and when he turned the corner from the stairs, he saw a man in a black suit at the end of the hall in front of my grandparents' bedroom door. He didn't stick around to see what happened next. He noped it downstairs and out the door to his girlfriend's house. He told me he hadn't seen anything since, and that if I felt it alone, it would leave me alone. I thought he was messing with me. I talked back to my grandpa, who said he believed my uncle and that he had seen the doors open and close by themselves and footsteps in the hall. I flipped out. I kept the dogs with me wherever I was. Nothing else happened until they got back. I asked my grandma if anything weird had happened before my family had bought the house. She said she didn't know and changed the subject. So I went to the library. This is what I found out from the librarian, who also happened to be a local historian, with evidence to back it up. So, apparently in 1859, the man who built the house had a son who had become a minister and was the pastor of the local church. He had gotten a local girl pregnant, and when the baby was born, he killed it to atone for his sin. When the mother of the baby tried to stop him, he beat her pretty badly. The brother of this poor girl said he wanted to speak with the minister and was shown upstairs to his study, which was, you guessed it, my grandparents' bedroom. The conversation heated up and ended up with the brother of the girl beating the minister senseless. So I saged the crap out of that house, against my grandmother's wishes, and anointed all the doorways with oil. There hasn't been another incident, but in my grandparents' will, the house is to be left to me. My aunt and uncles all have their own houses, and I love the house. My grandparents really want to keep it in the family. So, wish me luck. This past weekend, my wife's son and I went to the African American Firefighters Museum. We were the only family taking the tour, so we had a private tour of the museum to ourselves. Towards the end of the tour guide showed us a piece of steel that was donated to the museum, a piece of steel from the World Trade Center. He says we can touch it, and we all touched the steel plate. My wife immediately had some kind of reaction. She turns to me and says I need to leave. She leaves my son and I behind and goes downstairs and walks out of the building. I finish up with the tour guide, and I am puzzled as to why my wife basically ran away. My son and I take a few more photos of the building and outside, and we eventually get into our car. And as we were driving away, I said, okay, what was that all about? She describes feeling a mixture of sickness, feeling like she couldn't breathe, feeling like she needed to run away, and she said she couldn't go back inside that building. She then said that piece of metal was haunted, and that as soon as she touched it, something happened to her. I asked her, did you feel that way when we went inside the museum, or was it only when you touched the metal? She said she felt like something was in the building when we arrived, but it finally got to her touching the metal. My wife usually doesn't talk about paranormal stuff, ghosts, or anything like that unless it's a movie, and she never acts like she needs to leave a building the way she did that day. I did a bit of research and I'm curious, is this psychosomatic? It's pretty well documented that this emotional strain can have these sort of effects on people, and there is no doubt that this is a very emotionally charged experience, at least to those who are intensely empathetic. I'm not even sure if this is paranormal at all. It actually seems to be quite normal, as things like this are reported at concentration camp museums and battlegrounds. It can also be observed in locations where a person, within their own history, has been physically or emotionally abused with no death at all. This is simply how humans react to things, I suppose. So this happened just about 20 minutes ago. This is not some stupid live-action roleplay crap. I'm freaked out. I just moved out of the house I was living in because my roommate and I couldn't get along anymore, so I moved in with my grandmother till I can figure some stuff out. My grandfather died a year ago this month, and it's been really hard on my grandmother, so she welcomed me to come stay with her. Well, I've had no weird experiences at this house before, except for occasionally feeling watched while I'm here by myself. This house is over 60 years old. My dog and I are sitting in the living room in a recliner in a corner. I'm watching AP Bio and Hulu on my phone. No TV in the living room, but I was about to get up and go smoke a cigarette. Suddenly my dog raises her head up from sleeping and starts growling at the 4-foot horizontal mirror on the opposite wall. I tell her to stop. I look up from my phone and into the mirror. In the corner closest to where I'm sitting, but not in the corner I'm sitting in, a tall, slender man with silver hair and a pointed nose was staring at me. He wasn't staring at me directly. He was staring at me through the mirror. I was frozen with fear. After 5 seconds, he vanished. As soon as he vanished, my dog started choking really bad. After I took care of the pup and she chilled out, I ran into the den, a country and southern word for living room number 2, where my grandmother was and is watching TV. I started telling her what just happened, gave her the guy's details. She smiles really big and giggles a little bit and says, "Look on that shelf right there and move that family picture out of the way and tell me if the picture behind it looks like what you saw." I do just that. When I saw the picture she wanted me to look at, my heart just stopped. There was the guy I had just seen as an apparition. She says, "That's my daddy you saw. I always tell you if he would have met you, he would get on you for smoking cigarettes like he did. He died of lung cancer." So I'm currently not going into that living room. I don't care who it is. I don't mess with ghosts, man. And maybe I'll take this as a sign to stop smoking. I've had encounters with the paranormal since I was a child. I believe that experiencing such things from a young age inevitably leads to a curiosity and fascination with the paranormal, even for those of us who would rather not have more contact with the other side. This is how it is for me, at any rate. The experience I'm about to share was different from any other I've ever had. For you to understand the significance of these events, I have to first tell you about my friend Mike. I first met Mike a month or 2 after he had started dating one of my dearest friends. He was a divorced father of 3, a firefighter, a paramedic, a fiercely loyal friend, and one of the best guys I've ever known. You could always depend on him if you needed a shoulder, a laugh, or very nearly anything else he was able to give you. He and my friend were together for more than 2 years. In that time, she was happier than I've ever seen her, and he became a good friend to me. There was a local bar where we all liked to hang out, and where Mike could often be found playing pool on his evenings off when his girlfriend was busy with her daughter. This bar usually had very good live bands playing, so I would often stop in and have a drink while listening to the music and relaxing after work. Mike would often sneak up next to me, and if he saw me sitting at the bar alone, slap his open hand down on the wooden bar in front of me and tell me, jokingly, "Cheer up." He always insisted that I looked depressed. I think he just enjoyed startling me and knew it was good for a laugh. One Tuesday afternoon in May, I got a call from Mike's girlfriend asking me to start praying. It turned out that he had been in a terrible accident while riding his motorcycle, and things looked bad. The next evening, I was at work when she sent me a text message that simply said, "Mike's gone." It took everything I have to keep it together until the end of my shift. I was working as a server at the time, and the managers felt we were too busy for me to be allowed to go home. When I was finally able to leave, I made the 20-minute drive home with tears streaming down my face, trying not to let the crushing grief and anger overwhelm me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I parked my car, a '94 Cadillac, which in 2011 was sort of an anomalous beast of a vehicle, turned off the engine and let it wash over me. The injustice of the loss of such a great man in a world full of a-holes made me want to scream, but at the same time I felt I could barely breathe. As I sat there in my car, my head resting on the steering wheel, openly sobbing, a sudden, deafening bang came from the trunk of my car, startling me out of my grief, if only for a moment. It sounded like something had hit the center of the trunk lid, but I couldn't figure out how. I got out, circled the car, and saw nothing. None of the trees in the yard were within 10 feet of the car, so I knew nothing had dropped out of them. There were no marks on the car, which made no sense given how hard it had seemingly hit and how prone it was, having an actual metal body to dents and dings. Finally, there was nothing on the ground anywhere near the car that could have hit it, not so much as a single pine cone. As I stood there in my driveway, absolutely baffled as to what the noise could have been, I was suddenly struck by the memory of Mike's large hands slapping down on a wooden bar and him half shouting, "Cheer up." Now, I'm sure some of you might be thinking, cars make noises when they're cooling down, but I often would sit in my car, have a cigarette or two or three, and fooling around on my phone after getting home from work, and never before or again heard any sound even remotely like the one that night. My living situation at that time was pretty miserable, so my car was something of a refuge for me. I also looked in my rear and side view mirrors the moment I heard the bang and saw no sign of any person or creature anywhere near the yard and driveway. I looked for every possible rational explanation and found none. I don't blame anyone for being skeptical about an event they didn't witness, but I have no doubt that Mike decided to sneak up on me one last time and tell me to cheer up. For some background, I've had a few paranormal experiences when I was younger, which I chalked up to maybe I had an overactive imagination or coincidence. I've also been told I have a gift by a psychic, which is a story on its own. However, this happened a few weeks ago to me, and I'm still just in shock. So I was going out to dinner with some friends, and we all decided to dress fairly nice. I decided to wear a blazer over my dress. Most of the nights I had my hands in my blazer pockets to keep warm. I am 100% sure they had nothing inside of them. Flash forward a couple of hours and I get home with my one other friend. We decided to take some cute pictures on my balcony since we look nice. As my friend was taking pictures of me, she just suddenly says, "Whoa, did you see that?" I didn't see anything, but she swears she saw a white little ball go across the side of the camera really quickly. I kind of shrugged it off, even though I've heard about orbs, and she sounded like that's what she was describing. About 5 minutes later, I take my blazer off and toss it on the ground to get different pictures. It was there for a few minutes. When I go to put it back on, I put my hand in my pocket a few minutes after. I immediately felt something that wasn't there, so I pull it out, and it's this golden ring that has a J on it. At this point, I was a little uneasy because I was certain I didn't have that in there all night, and I had never seen it before. No one else was in my apartment except my friend and I, who were with each other the entire time. The weird part is that my dad passed away almost 3 years ago, and his first initial was J. So as I'm trying to rationalize this and can't, I think it must have been my dad. I ended up sending my mom a picture without telling her the story first, and she tells me he had that ring for a long time and had seen it before. I was pretty shocked and don't know how to feel about it all. Is my dad trying to communicate or tell me something, or did he just want me to have it? Has anyone else had something similar happen, where the dead have given you a physical gift from the other side? A few months ago, I had talked about an experience I had at my friend Kay's house. Both of her parents' houses definitely have some weird stuff going on. The story is from her mom's house again. Around 2 years ago, I was at Kay's house, and there were a few other people there. We were just spending the day hanging out, and nothing weird happened at all. We spent some time messing around in her quad and had left it parked near the back doors towards the edge of the forest. When it got dark, me and Kay went out to move it back into the garage. Since it was dark, Kay was using the flashlight on her phone to see the ignition, and I was standing on the back porch a few feet away from her. Kay dropped her phone, and since her flashlight was on, I could see it slide down her leg, but the light disappeared before it hit the ground. Kay reached to get it, but her phone wasn't there. I was kind of just watching her because I was feeling sketched out. She searched the ground all around her for a few minutes and couldn't find it, so she was sitting on the quad, and we were both like, "What? Where did her phone go?" We were about to give up when, I kid you not, I saw the light from her phone appear a couple of inches above her head and drop straight into her lap. She picked her phone up off her lap and yelled, "What?" Right as that happened, I started hearing noises coming from all directions from the forest around us. This might be more of a glitch in the Matrix story, but since we've had so many other weird paranormal experiences, I've always leaned towards it being more paranormal. So back in the 80s, there was this girl that went to our local college, Alice. Alice was a first-year student that wasn't doing so well in her studies. No matter what she did, she couldn't quite grasp the material. Exams had arrived, and this was Alice's last chance to get her grades up. She spent countless hours studying day in and day out. She studied to the point where the stress finally got too much of her, and Alice had finally cracked. She walked into the bathroom and began filling up the tub. At this point, Alice was crying and saying out loud to herself repeatedly, "I'm sorry, Mama. Please forgive me." When the tub was filled to the brim with water, Alice submerged herself into the water. She took a knife and sliced both of her wrists all the way down her forearms. Alice was found by her roommate dead inside the overflown tub filled with blood. After the incident, students on the 6th floor of the dormitory began reporting disturbances to their floor supervisor. They reported that during the night, they could hear the sound of someone crying. The water in the bathroom tub would turn on randomly throughout the night. It got to the point where everyone became spooked and no one wanted to live on the 6th floor. During the year of Alice's death, the graduating class painted a mural above the exit of the school library. This mural consisted of faculty members at the time that meant a great deal to the graduates. A month after Alice's death, a student one day noticed something strange about the mural. Off to the side of faculty members stood what appeared to be a grayish figure glaring at the faculty. No one had a clue how it got there. Due to many complaints and requests for floor transfers, the faculty decided to shut down the 6th floor. Darkness and emptiness fills the hall of the 6th floor dorms now. Students report that when you use the elevator sometimes, no matter what floor you choose, it will take you to the 6th floor. The doors will open to a dark hallway. No matter how many times they push the close button, the elevator will not close until it decides to. Students on the 5th floor report hearing loud footsteps of someone pacing back and forth on the 6th floor. At times they say you can hear the sound of running water on the 6th floor. Due to several reports, security would investigate the 6th floor to sometimes find the water running in an overflowing tub. A few friends of mine go to this university and swear by what they've heard and saw. No one still knows how the glaring gray figure appeared on the library mural, where, ironically, Alice spent the majority of her time studying. Either Alice or some unknown entity haunts the 6th floor of the university. A while back, I was staying with some relatives so I could visit my aunt who was dying of cancer. I'd heard stories that their house was haunted. In fact, many of their neighbors had also shared stories of weird experiences in their houses. At the time, I was pretty skeptical, being somewhat young and never having experienced anything paranormal for myself. The first night there, I woke up in the middle of the night unable to sleep. This was before the days of smartphones, and I was sharing a room with a relative. So instead of lying there in the dark, I opted to lay on the couch in their game room and watch television. Their game room was rather large, with a billiard table, and there was a door in there that led to my cousin's room. As I was watching TV, I heard a man crying, but assumed my cousin was crying because his mom had cancer. Then I started to doze off when, all of a sudden, I heard what sounded like someone doing a break shot on the pool table. I sat up and looked behind me, and the room was still empty except for me. Even then, I still thought it was my imagination. The next morning, I pulled my cousin aside and asked if he was doing okay. Explained that I had heard him crying in the middle of the night. He looked at me with a confused expression and claimed he slept through the night. He is not the type of person who is embarrassed to show emotion, so I believed him. Then I told him about hearing someone play pool. He gave me a smile and said he hears them playing pool every now and then from his room. I was bewildered, but still not fully convinced. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night again, but this time it was because I heard a knock on the door. Thinking maybe something was going on with my aunt, I quickly opened the door to an empty, silent hallway. I closed the door and heard another knock. This time I realized it was coming from inside the bathroom attached to my room. Immediately I woke up the other person in the room. Don't even know how he slept through all the noise and made him open the bathroom door. Unsurprisingly, it was empty. The only way in and out of the bathroom is in the room, so there was no way someone could have been playing a joke on us. And this is what changed my view of the paranormal forever. Hey friends, thanks for listening. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.